Hello everyone. Hi Bernard. Hi Tal. Hi Jitendra.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Let's wait for 1 more minute and other folks let them join and we'll start from there. And yeah, please feel free to add any agenda item which you would like to discuss. The link I have shared over the Slack.
I apologize in advance. I might have to cut out at the 30-minute mark.
Okay, Tal. Yeah. Okay, we have passed 3 minutes to our actual meeting time, so we can start with today's with limited audience. Okay. Okay, so shall we start if everyone is okay?
Fine for me.
Okay. Okay, I'll share my screen. So I hope it's visible to everyone.
Yes.
Okay. So actually today I have put these two agenda items for discussion. One is the impact analysis, and another is like our last week discussion, which will go in further details. So yeah, before going that, Miss, I'll give a quick recap, Miss, what exactly we did last week. So let me quickly open it. Okay. So yeah, last week we were discussing about the service assurance flow. So how it will be interacting with the package controller and observability. So yeah, we discussed on the some items on the models also. Like we were feeling that the service assurance CR should have what need to be observed, how it should be observed, when we need to correlate, and what action need to be taken. So we put this 4 items to accommodate inside our CR so that we can realize end-to-end assurance system. So yeah, we were brainstormed on these topics, and we came to a few conclusion points. So that's some comments I have captured it here. So last time Wim was there, and he also shared his thoughts. So these were the few comments what need to be observed that should be provided by the service assurer. Yeah, we'll try to take an example like UPF. So the UPF says I need to observe some kind of workload, so that need to be observed by the that should be provided by the service assurance, and how it should be observed. People are opinionated that it should be done by the observability because it is for some further details, and also if you would like to make our system more declarative, then the how should be always be answered by the module or the provider who provides the observability capability. And the third one, when to correlate, we need to service assurance would provide it. It's like a trigger point for those observability parameters, and what action need to be taken. That again, observability need to decide it. So this is the one. And yeah, a few before going further, any comments from Bernard or Tal? Anyone? What do you think? Is it the right approach, or any comments?
I would have one request.
Yeah.
I would like to make sure that in the modeling guidelines and in the guidelines for the behavior of, be it controllers or, as mentioned here, observability providers, there are certain conventions or recommendations being made of how to implement that. Yeah, that means sort of if it said there should be expressed by observability provider, I would like to have some kind of statements of how that should happen, how what the behavior should explicitly sort of reflect here, and therefore it's not only about simply sort of having a sort of a high sort of hand waving type of statement here, but sort of really boiling it down to something where we say the implementation and the sort of reference which are mentioned here are sort of easily trackable, and we sort of are not going to manufacture the solutions sort of depending on what kind of network function or what kind of environment we are having, but there are clear sort of rules of how to sort of express that. And there can of course be different options, but even for the options, we should sort of have some recommendations of how to handle that, because otherwise it's simply sort of saying there is going to be a guru function which is going to do that somehow, but it doesn't help us from a, let's say, from a telco operator perspective to understand how that will be managed in the day-to-day operations.
Okay, but it would be okay if you add one more example. It's like to better understand your idea about this
I can give an example regarding the impact analysis also, as a recommendation, and I can sort of try to explain that. But basically, sort of when we're talking about sort of who needs to express something, how should certain functions behave, I would like to have sort of this sort of written down as a recommendation from the Nephew community of this would be the best way of how to handle those things, or a recommendation of what kind of options we have in place, so that based on that we can have a sort of a clearer view on sort of what we as telco operators would have to sort of take into consideration. Again, I don't want to have sort of solutions where sort of depending on the workload provider or infrastructure provider, we have different options and they all don't fit together. This is something which is basically would not help us here. Yeah.
Right. I agree. Okay. So how exactly would like to deal with it? This particular modeling proposal is like, shall it be a part of a group 4, or do we need to write any further documentation or capture this aspect somewhere?
I believe first of all, Tal has a sort of a comment to that, and I would love to have that somehow as a modeling guideline, as a guideline also for the behavior of certain functional elements in our Nephew setup. But Tal, I believe you have got thoughts here.
Yeah, excuse me. This has been a challenging topic for about 40 years, right? The observing data and trying to model it and put it in buckets that you can process it when you know that it's very, very heterogeneous and mixed, and again, every provider, every piece of equipment does it differently, right? And you're trying to model it and push it into certain buckets that you can actually analyze it with any kind of precision, right? So this will be ongoing, and we're not really inventing this topic here, of course, right? This is a wide challenge. However, to Bernard's thought that, what can we do in terms of modeling within Nephew to make sure that the data that at least we produce, right, is digestible, right, by our observability framework. I think an important part to add to it is not just modeling the data, but metadata, which is, again, a very big kind of word, very catch-all, but it could be understood as something that's out of band with the actual content, but that tags it in a certain way, right?
Exactly.
Right. So it's not the solution to the problem, right? Again, this is a challenge that's just ongoing, but I would just list it as another one of our tools, right? So one tool is modeling, one tool is metadata, And yeah, of course, there's a lot of tools in between, right? Filtering data. A lot of times the problem is too much data, moving the data.
Yep.
Yeah, so we're still a little bit in the high level here of the philosophy of what we're doing. But I think as we start to drill down to actual examples, we'll see these challenges and think, oh, here's an area where we might need to tag something with some sort of metadata. So just to keep it in mind, I don't know if we have to actually write it down, but these are just my high-level
I have a simple proposal here, and it's more like sort of trying to describe sort of the core elements and then extend this approach as it might seem suitable. So I believe we all agree that we want to make use of the Kubernetes resource model in order to capture the main entities of what we are managing here. Yeah, there's not sort of going to be some kind of sidearm where we say now sort of these elements sort of will be handled in a different setup. We are all sort of agreeing on we want to make the use of the Kubernetes resource model. And based on that, I can imagine that at least the skeleton information or metadata is something where we might come up with conventions of, if we're talking about what needs to be observed, then we can hopefully agree on that these what needs to be observed should somehow be sort of reflected in the Kubernetes resource model. Yeah. Question mark. I just want to make sure that sort of here there's a common understanding, but my impression would be sort of basically Nephew is using Kubernetes resource model. So basically then if we're talking about what needs to be observed, then sort of it should be something which is then described either as a core resource or a custom resource. And if that's the case, then the question is sort of out of those elements which we are modeling here, how do I know when I start from a high level intent, what elements belong to that high level intent? This is for me, this sort of establishing the skeleton information of those elements which are somehow related to what we are actually wanting to manage from a sort of a high-level perspective. So starting from this high-level intent, be it a deployment descriptor or be it a package description or whatever, I would want to understand what are the related elements which have been sort of identified in the course of the configuration process or actually in the course of the deployment process. This is simply only the skeleton information, not talking about what kind of KPIs are to be monitored, etc., but basically the resources which are affected here sort of should somehow be sort of linkable to this high level intent. That would be my starting assumption. That means I would hope, and now I'm already jumping to this impact analysis discussion. I would want to make sure that if we are sort of looking into this Kubernetes resources, that in the status of each of those resources, I can derive what are the related elements. Yeah, that means if I'm sort of breaking down a high level intent in the status of that resource, I should sort of be able to link to those other elements which are sort of associated with this high level intent. And then I can drill that down further in a cascade and say, okay, I'm now going to look into those lower level sort of resources. And if they might have also some kind of breakdown structure, then I can, in the similar manner, identify the associated resources. And I can then basically sort of iterate until I've got all the related elements which are to be potentially related to this high level intent. That would be my skeleton information, which I would expect. And this is a simple specification, simply saying if Nephew is doing some kind of configuration management and relating a high level intent to a lower level intent, then in the status field, there should be sort of a well-defined way of identifying the related sub-resources.
Bernard, could I go ahead with one query here?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's like we are segregating our management cluster and the workload cluster, right? And how we visualize the intent that we are creating that is in a management cluster. And further, after the package processing, the lower level constructs are getting created in workload cluster. So, the propagating those low level information to the management cluster still we are not sure how that's going to
but
happen,
from
right?
from my perspective, that's easy, because sort of in the management cluster, I would be understanding to which workload clusters I would be delegating certain deployment tasks. Yeah, that means I would know that sort of I would have a set of resources which I want to put onto cluster A, B, and C. And I would then not only sort of say in the namespace X, I want to have resource Y, but I would also say in cluster Z, this is something which would be instantiated. And then sort of via this, I would have a reference point where I say in the combination of cluster, namespace, and resource identifier, I would have the possibility to then look into further details. And then I would have to then go to the cluster Z and understand sort of what has been defined there. But I have a well-defined way of linking sort of from a management cluster to the subsequent clusters, workload clusters, sort of the entities which have been sort of instantiated over there.
Okay. But what I see, if I go to the API, those are available currently. If you take example of NF topology or any deployment NF deployment CR, right? It talks in a very high level, and only it refers to the package. If I show you here in this diagram, yeah, here I'll just giving the high level picture. It's like how exactly those resources are related, or possibly I think a document from TAL would be a good reference point for it. But yeah, let's go by this picture. So if you see, NF topology is connected to NF instance, and it is connected to the one package reference. Yeah, it is connected to the package, right? So problem, what I see that it becomes a difficult task to correlate this NF topology with a specific pod, or let's say a specific pod name in the workload cluster. So that I see still it is not connected. So maybe I'll take one example. Let's say I take an example like we would like to query about the availability of any NF deployed. So we deployed some NF UPF, and we'd like to know its status. So that can be done at the level of the NF instance. But let's say in the management, if you would like to know what are the pods where this NF got deployed or is running. So that piece still, I feel that it will become a difficult question to answer. Maybe
no, I don't agree. I don't agree. So this is now sort of more a request for the implementation and the behavior of for instance, the controllers who are sort of then managing the NF topology or an NF instance, etc. My thoughts here, what you're looking at currently, from my point of view, is a spec section of the custom resource models for those entities. Yeah, and they would be handled, for instance, in the management cluster, and they've got their lifecycle in the management cluster and special controllers which are able to interpret that there. And then as soon as they break it down and then say, look here, sort of this is now has to be mapped to some entity in the workload cluster, the obligation which I would recommend is that these controllers then should put the references to those sub-entities into the status section of their resources, so that any kind of other tooling could sort of go through those entities and determine what are the related entities which have been generated based on the activities of those controllers. It's a simple rule which they have to pursue that, and when they update the status of these custom resources. So what you're looking here at is the status, the spec section of those resources. I want to make sure that when they're executing their reconciliation loop, that they update the status and then sort of inform sort of about what kind of sub resources they are relating to. And they could also be residing on the sort of a workload cluster, for instance.
Okay. So would you like to take some information from workload cluster and also put in the status of the object?
I would want to have a specification in the I would want to have a specification in the modeling section basically saying that as soon as the reconciliation loop of those controllers, which are related to those entities which are shown here, are doing their work, that they should update sort of the references of the linked sort of sub-resource which they're sort of looking at. And we could come up with a simple specification of what they should be doing here, but basically it's saying that sort of it will be a list of sub-resources with a combination of cluster reference and sort of namespace and resource identifier.
But again, those resources are getting injected inside the package, right? So it is not there in the management cluster, right? In that moment of time. So updating
any kind of resource is running in whatever cluster. And any kind of resource, if it's going to break down sort of its own specs into a set of sub-resources, then it should reflect those sub-resources in the status field of its own resource.
Okay, Bernard. I still miss I would like to have some few queries that I'll have it offline. Okay.
I would like, for instance, to ask Tal, for instance, is that something which is unreasonable, or is that something which, from a modeling perspective, might make sense?
I think it makes a lot of sense. So I think of it this way, right? Until now, I think in Nefio, we've been really focusing on deployment. But the opposite route, we know it's there. We have to focus also on what data we're receiving back, observability, right? So the observability group is looking at that. But I think it can absolutely be a few data types that can be put anywhere, right, in our models, right? That would include some sort of, well, this is the kind of data I need, right? So a tool or a subsystem to look through all of it and just get that part out and take all of it together, know nothing about deployment, but know, okay, these are the kind of KPIs, these are the kind of buckets of data that I'm going to need to establish. So if the technology, if it's Kafka, if it's Prometheus, whatever it is, whatever your framework is, it could configure itself, right, according to this reality that you're creating, right? So it could get a sense of capacity, it could get a sense of size, it could get a sense of what the latency requirements are. So it'll be able to filter out the data it doesn't need and make sure that the data it does need is there, right? And this will provide some sort of validation of that as well. So yeah, this is an exciting part of the modeling, right? But yeah, sorry, go ahead. Thinking out loud.
So the model will represent the CR, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, so I'll point out something that I pointed out when talking about our current models. We often use the term CRD interchangeable with ARM, right? CRD being custom resource definitions, right? It is not interchangeable at Nefio or generally, but especially in Nefio, many of our types never become custom resources, never become custom resource definitions, because they're handled entirely right now in our Git backend, but they're never actually declared as resources anywhere on any cluster, not on the workload cluster and not on the management cluster. So a lot of our processing doesn't happen actually in Kubernetes, as I point out, right? So I have a whole POC showing that we can store all our data in a SQL database and actually never use Kubernetes at all as a management cluster, because we don't actually need it unless we want to do data validation of those resources, right? My point being is that we really have to think about it as just data. It's models. They can be stored in any database. We store them in Git right now, right, because we're oriented towards GitOps. But yeah, to an extent, Kubernetes is out of the picture here, right? Think of it as you have a bunch of data types as elaborate and as big as you need them to be. There's no real storage concern here, right? And you can include any amount really of configuration data that you need to manage it. The status side is more complicated, right? We mentioned Bernard started saying before, saying, we're not doing anything out of band here. It's all in our data types with their status. Well, status in Kubernetes, and even in whatever data backend we choose, is very slowly updated, right? Doing a git commit in GitOps is not a fast thing that you do 1,000 times a second, right? So we do have, of course, the data flows are separate. Status is something very high level that is updated infrequently, right? And it's more about showing that the system is working correctly, right? Status means status, right? It's not actually KPI.
Yeah, Carl, but I'm a little bit worried when I hear that, because if we are starting now to sort of open up to, we can put that into a SQL database or an object sort of key value store database with sort of diverse structures, and we can put it in SNMP, etc. Then we're opening up the whole sort of Pandora box of different implementation options and integration aspects, which sort of really make our lives as telco operators a hell. So I really would love to come up with conventions which sort of simplify these aspects as much as possible. Of course, I'm not saying that we can sort of solve the whole setup here, but what I do want to make sure is that we start with as simple as possible approach. And the reason why sort of we as telcos were so, let's say, interested in that is because we've got too many management tools, too many options of how to implement something. And if we task vendor A and vendor B, they always got something different to do. And then we've got a huge integration hassle here. So right. Please make it more simple and not more complex. Yeah.
So I'll point out that what I'm talking about and where the data is stored is an implementation detail. The whole point here is exactly that whatever we're doing, it's always going to be KRM, right? So if it's stored in an object database, in MongoDB, in Postgres, or in a Git repository for that matter, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's just a storage issue. The reason I'm mentioning this, and the reason I think it's important, is just whatever storage we do, this is just part of the design principles of KRM, right? That status, these are types designed for orchestration, right? It's not that you can use these, there's no streaming, for example, here, right? So if you want to use status, we just have to keep in mind, it doesn't matter which backend you use, even if you use 100% Kubernetes etcd here, right? You'll be stuck with status being always out of date if you're looking for it to be.
That's true, yes. But maybe we can separate a little bit what we mean about status, because yes. I simply want to make sure that this skeleton information, that means the managed entities which we are looking at, I'm not talking about the KPIs, etc., but the managed entities which are exposing certain performance indicators, that these are somehow managed via these KRM mechanisms, which might not have to be streaming, because the change rate of sort of pods, etc., is definitely sort of going to be a different change rate compared to, let's say, requests per second, etc. Yeah. So I would want to make sure that this sort of skeleton information of the elements which we are observing is something which we are handling in a consistent way. And this is also related to your metadata, which you've been mentioning before, regarding what sort of kind of metadata is associated with these models here.
Right, exactly that. This is about establishing conventions that we'll be using throughout Nefio, and maybe even beyond Nefio, for any kind of use of telco on Kubernetes with KRM. Here are some ideas to make sure that you are using well-defined types that could be used by any kind of observability framework.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, actually, we discussed 2 points, like for the model where we can express what observability is needed, and also we are talking about now relationship in the model. So that these are the 2 things from the modeling aspects, right? If I understand correctly.
Yes. So again, my impression is that I'm not talking about the performance indicators, but I'm talking about the managed entities which
Okay.
we sort of are wanting to observe, and being able to link it to the high-level intent, which might have been expressed by the GitOps process. So making sure that we have the skeleton information of all those reference entities sort of easily accessible. And for me, that would be a simple mechanism of just having that as a well-defined structure within the status field of the Kubernetes resource models.
Okay. Brian. Yeah. So yeah, I'll just go further. So yeah, we have passed 30 minutes. But yeah, these are some quick agreement and conclusion that we made in the last meeting. So I'll just go through it, and then we'll take our two topics. So we also discussed about the approach of implementing the service assurance. So there are two possible approach: single controller as a single controller, and yeah, different modules can also absorb service assurance, and we can implement in a distributed way. So yeah, this is the implementation detail, and the further how NF should be observed should be expressed by the observability provider. So yeah, here actually we would like to make it more declarative, so that service assurance can say, I would like to observe on so and so parameter, and the implementation details are provided by the observability framework or observability provider. The next one, service assurance will express the requirement which will be met by observability. So generally in Nephew, currently we have the conditional dance. So where the one module expresses the condition and another fulfills it. So in this way, the assurance will express the requirement for the observability, and observability are going to meet those requirements. The next one, the CR injected into package to convey the observability requirement. So yeah, so this was one part where we were thinking we could involve in the package processing or package hydration process. So where the service assurance could inject a resource for the observability to express its requirement. And the next one, the action pod should be created dynamically to listen on the event stream and take action. So yeah, this part is where we have configured the observability, and now the stream of events is started based on our configured trigger or conditions. And now this based on this stream, we would like to take certain action. So this active pod would be listening on this stream and perform action. So this is covered in the flow also. I'll go through it. And the next one, the package validation to make consistency between the package and service assurance here. So yeah, we had one a thought that if we I'll just give example. Like for the package deployment of the VUPF, at the time of deployment, we say suppose we convey that we would like to support some 1,000 active sessions. But in service assurance, we are saying that no, we would like to meet 5,000 active session. So this will create a system inconsistent. So how to deal with it? So there's one possible suggestion that use the policy for the package validation, and if does not confirms the package, not either you don't allow the assurance CR to meet 5,000 active session. So yeah, these were some quick conclusion that we made in the last meeting. So any question? Otherwise, I'll directly jump on the flow also. So any questions here?
My comment here simply would be any kind of sort of recommendation which we're trying to make here should result in a specification.
Okay.
Yeah, not in a general type of we need to do this, but I would like to sort of have a common understanding here in this round that if we are coming up with such a thing, then we would also ultimately sort of derive out of that a recommendation of how it should be implemented. Yeah. and it could be also a guideline and so on, but I don't want to just keep it as a bullet point, but something where we say, would this lead now to an implementation recommendation? Would it lead to a guideline, so that we have a clear action plan of how we follow up on those bullet points?
So Bernard, so that should be the output of our work group, or do you think it should be a work group 1 or architecture group?
So some of the things, it depends. So it could be that we are saying this would then result into a modeling guideline. Yeah, and then we would capture that in this area, or it would result into an implementation where we say we need a specific controller to handle that. And then we would possibly hand it over to the automation team, etc. But I simply would want to make sure that it is sort of something which is actually then implemented and not simply kept as, yes, it would be nice if we would have something like that, but we have no idea of how we would then follow up on that.
Okay. Maybe this will get clarified by work group 1 meeting. Sorry, SIG 1 meeting. So that will get clarified, like who will be responsible to maintaining this recommendation. Okay. Thank you. And yeah, so Bernard, shall we go to impact analysis, or we'll go to this flow that I have modified? Which one would you like to take first?
Regarding impact analysis, I would want to make a sort of a recommendation. I would add that to the document of Tal, where I would come up with a recommendation of how we potentially could also try to capture sort of these relationships between these different entities. And based on that, I would present it hopefully then in the beginning of next year.
Okay, sure. So yeah, but then we'll jump on this flow, what I have modified. And Bernard, also I would like to mention that we might need to add more details in the our user story, so that the next month when work group 1 going to analyze it, we should able to give some implementation details also, like high level implementation detail, like if SIG 2 needs certain information, so that should be available in that the documentation. What I mean to say, I'll give just one example. When we say we should also put some example around what is high level intent and what is low level objects and how they are related. So one example also we should provide in terms of pre-5GC or RAN deployment.
Yeah.
So we should
my
try
request
that.
My request would be, this is also the reason why we've got this document. Please, any kind of statement where we say we need to clarify this should be then commented in that document. Therefore, we've got this user story, and based on that, we can follow up on that. Otherwise, sort of we don't know sort of what are the missing points. And I would like to know the counterpart, so that those who are asking those questions, we can get in contact and make sure that we've got a proper understanding. Otherwise, I will be writing something, and again, I might be missing the point. So I would really want to have sort of someone who is now raising this question or this issue also be sort of listed as in the comment section, so that I can then, based on that, come up with a proper description. Because I've already been trying to write this user story several times, and every time it says something it might be missing. And I just want to make sure that the next time I'm going to write something, it's going to really sort of fit, and not that we have to reiterate it again.
Okay, sure. Sure, Bernard. So would it be okay, Miss, if I review it and add the comment there, and we'll try to go further from there?
Yes, that's very fine.
Okay.
Yeah, but again, sort of as I can imagine that, for instance, if the question came from the automation guys or Wim or whoever, I would love to then sort of really make sure that if I'm going to give an example, that they say, this is it, yes, I can implement it. You remember we had, I believe, also with the experts from Samsung, so we already had this handshake, and the experts from Samsung said, yes, this is something which we can implement. And therefore,
Yeah.
I had the impression, yes, we can go for that. But if there's still questions, I would really want to understand who raised the question, what needs to be done here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Wim is also here. So we'll take opinion from the Wim also. Wim, we actually had Wim. Are you there?
Yeah, I was a bit late, but yeah,
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah, Wim. So just would like to take your opinion. Currently, we are trying to create this user story. So what kind of details would you be needing, or how you are visualizing the implementation will progress, or who will be involved? So how exactly we should tackle this thing, user story? What is the
So we
general
started,
approach?
I think we started to document a little bit with Alex's, first of all, we have the user story. So there is some guidelines on what those should encompass. And then we started to, so there is in the SIG one on the board, I'll look up the link. We started to see, what I'm trying to say is that so it's kind of a flow, right? So you basically have user stories to say, okay, this is what I would like to see, right? Then you go to the next phase, which is, okay, what are the components and the APIs and all? So we basically put it together to see, okay, what are the things that you need in order to deliver the user stories? And then you start to implement, and then you probably iterate and so on and so forth. So it's basically an iterative process.
Okay.
So we started to document. I think Alex is doing that, or at least he started to identify the items that we need in the next phase beyond the user stories. And so I'll look up that link and I'll share it. Then you can already see. This is not yet. So we just started to document a little bit to make it a bit clearer what are all the pieces that are needed to be able to eventually implement, right? Or do a proof of concept or something like that.
So in context of SIG 2, so what kind of detail would be needed? I mean to say that next month, I think SIG 2 going to be asking those details, right? So would you be looking towards some module level details, or how exactly would it be sufficient if
I'll
you give
share the link in a bit. One moment.
Okay, sure.
Trying to dig it up. Issue board. Okay, I found it. Continue, so but I'll.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Yeah, but actually, I'm also in SIG 1. I'm asking for the feedback that we are waiting for the feedback, but I don't think so. Currently, we got any review there. So
yeah. So what we can do is sort of based on the user story, and I've as far as I've understood, Wim, we can also try to write down both the models as well as the components and how we believe. I can make a recommendation of how I believe they would need to interact with one another. The only difficulty which I have is that if I come up with any kind of components and elements which I believe might be needed here, we might have to do some consolidation between the different user stories. Because just in the same manner as you've now got actors, SA controller, kube, API server, package control, etc., here in this diagram, I might come up with different elements and components which might sort of be used here. And therefore, we might come up with different, let's say, architectures and components which sort of are potentially also being contradicting one another. So I was just asking myself, how do we make sure that when we're listing these components, we are sort of making use of a well-defined set of components as a starting point, and only extend the list of components as needed. This is something which I'm not quite clear about how we do that.
Now, I think, Bernard, just to make it clear, right? So the user stories, we don't expect that detail there, right? So if you look, maybe it's good to see, I think, the ORAM working group, which is working group 3, I think. They are they have a bunch of user stories in the making, as far as I understand. I haven't really reviewed them myself, but they have a number of them. And so that is the first step. It's basically, what do we want to see, right? From this, that's basically what the user story is, with some context, right? The next phase that we are doing, or that the team will do, is then go to the level that I just shared, right? So yeah, those type of things. So it's an iterative. It's also an iterative process, and it goes a little bit step by step, right? That we have to go through. So in other words, for me, the user story should not contain the components at this stage, right? So they should basically describe what we would like to see from an assurance point of view, focusing on a specific use case or a specific environment, right? And I think then the next stage is to start looking at the next breakdown on how that would look like, if you see what I mean.
I was just wondering, did you have the chance of looking into the impact analysis user story? Because we were following the guidelines of the template, listing all the elements there. And I was just wondering, because this handshake between sort of specifying the guidelines and then following up on that, this is not really taking place from my perspective. And that's why I wanted to understand sort of how do we improve here.
Yeah. So one of the suggestions, or one of the things that which was always pending, which now I think has been agreed upon. So SIG 1, so there is 2 meetings. So I think first the main SIG 1 meeting has moved 1 hour later, right? But the other thing that's probably more relevant in this context is there is a meeting scheduled on Friday between SIG 1 and SIG 2 members to discuss this level of detail, by the way.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And that's how we should improve, because what we have done, as you rightly point out, is we have basically say, okay, this is what we would like to have, right? But then we have not really done anything with it, nor really given feedback, whether it's okay or not okay, whether we can improve and stuff like that. So that is going to take place. Now, I believe that these meetings will not happen this year. I'm not sure. I don't believe that tomorrow there is a meeting, but they are going to start from the new year onwards.
Okay, understood.
And that hopefully is then a means to connect SIG 1 and SIG 2 more. I think they are somehow, for me, we are all one team in my view. So I didn't see myself as SIG 2 and I see myself as both, to be honest. But at least there is a bit of more of formality to how those things unite and where you have feedback and stuff like that. Because right now in SIG 2 we are mainly focused on delivery of release 2, right? And we are less focused on reviewing all these documents, or at least I'm speaking for myself.
Yes. Understood. Yeah, I understand that. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Brad. So could we jump on this flow?
By the way, Subhash, one maybe it's a small detail actually.
Yeah.
The package revision resources, it's not the Cube APIs, it's actually the Porch API server. It's a minor detail.
I see. Yeah, right.
But I just wanted some people might call it out as well.
Yeah, okay, sure. So based on the comments from the last week meeting, I modified it. Like I'll just go through quickly on each of the steps. So service assurance controller will be listening on the package revision, and the user will create a service assurance CR. And once after that, a user will create a UPF package variant set using the package controller. And then it will receive. Then the service assurance controller will receive a reconciliation notification about the this UPF package result. And there it will prepare inject a observability CR to the package with the condition for the observability, so that it expresses its a requirement, what and when to observe. It's like for example, I would like to check whether CPU is means I would like to observe the UPF, and if it load hits the 50, whether its load hits the 50% or not. So just giving an example, it's like these two parts would be covered on this particular CR, and finally the package in the package hydration process, observability will fulfill that condition. It will set up the observability configuration, might be in a workload cluster or management cluster. So we'll just keep this responsibility on the observability. And as a step number 7, we will instantiate one pod which will actively listening on those observability data stream, and here it will do the correlation. So it will give the answer what action need to be taken on those correlation. So this particular pod will answer it, and yeah, once all the package hydration process is done, or all the choreography, all the what do you call conditions are met. So the package will get created. Package will get created and propagated to workload cluster, and finally the reconciliation will happen there. So in this way, I feel we can configure the service assurance loop or service assurance goal in this entire deployment, NF deployment. So this is the one modification I did based on the previous comments. So if any questions?
Yeah, I raised my hand, I think. Subhash,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
one thing is like, so, okay, I think I see. So you were saying that the service assurance CR should be injected dynamically. In my view, it can be part of the blueprint already. So there is probably two scenarios. One is that you know already. So if you deploy a UPF, like we do today in the package, we have a set of resources. From my perspective, service assurance could already be there from the beginning, right? If you know that these are things that you have now. Of course, if you have dynamic assurance things that you want to change the package, you have to go to the change management side. But what I'm trying to get to is the injection of the service assurance is not necessarily needed. You can basically put it as part of the package. So it's basically I see it more as the package contains service assurance resources that will be, let's say, consumed one way or another. But you don't need to inject your service assurance into the package. You can just update the package direct, and that will give you the assurance requirements that you will give to observability that you will eventually consume. If you see what I mean?
Okay. I understood. But let's say dynamically or a runtime, if we want to support the service assurance, like based on this particular CR created by any user, like a package we have it, and in that package
you can update the package, right? You can just update the package.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean to say same thing. Like I will be injecting that context in the package.
But it's basically you create a new revision of the package. Basically, that's what I think you're trying to say.
Yeah, right. So let's say if we that CR is already available in the package, and again we modify it. That means again we are creating another package revision. Is it not right?
For every change, you create a new package revision, so you can keep track of all the changes that were happening.
Right.
And so on and so forth.
So I think this should be also okay, right? Means either you inject it or it is available directly inside the package.
So normally you always go via ports to do so, right? So all the changes are happening through ports somehow. So normally it's the package author that is doing this.
Okay.
So that's basically one thing. But the more, I think the other thing is that I think we have to draw the observability in two spaces. One is in the management cluster and the other one is in the workload cluster.
Right. This I agree. Yeah.
And so what you draw here is mainly the management cluster, but I think the most important will happen on the workload cluster.
Yeah. Here, actually, I mean to say that we have passed this requirement to observability. Let observability handle it in whichever the way they want.
Yes, but most likely what I'm expecting to happen is that the observability requirement will be actuated onto the workload cluster, right? There is a
Right.
component of observability in the management cluster which you will interact with, right? Because
yeah.
that's your aggregated view, right?
Yeah.
But the actual requirements to collect the statistics like the load will have to come from the workload cluster itself.
Yeah.
So in other words, there is a next stage here which happens after config sync exporting the information to the management cluster where the data is going to be collected. And then there will be an observability component on the workload cluster, which basically gets the information on a per workload cluster basis. And then you have a component on the management cluster from observability, which will collect the various information from each workload cluster towards the management cluster where things will happen, right? And the assurance, there is some piece of assurance that happens on the workload cluster, right? If they need to be, let's say, semi-real time.
Right. The innermost loop.
Yes, and then there is the management cluster, which will then get information from all the workload clusters, and he will do the what you call the semi-real time assurance actions.
Right. Yeah.
So we have to make. So somehow we have to put that into the picture if we can. I know it becomes maybe a bit too busy, but I think it's important to detail that.
Of course. Yeah. I'll take this comment. We have just one more minute, so I'll give the opportunity to Bernard. Yeah, Bernard, maybe you could go ahead.
Okay, we're already sort of at the end of this hour, but I just wanted to mention that there are sort of mechanisms where sort of, for instance, observability is managed by different elements which are not working as a sidecar or injected into the package. And therefore, we might want to differentiate a little bit when we're saying that we've got certain elements which we want to observe, certain KPIs which we want to observe, that we also try to think a little bit about the metadata which we are trying to manage in this context. So for instance, if we are talking about CPU consumption, etc., those things would be sort of handled on a different level, and we would not have to inject any kind of sidecar for that. So therefore, I believe that we need to also a little bit have a look into what kind of information are we wanting to collect, and if needed, do we have to inject sort of something into the site, into the package, or is that something which is coming from a different source? This, I believe, needs a little bit more elaboration here.
Yeah, Bernard, we discussed that last week. You were not there, right?
Okay.
But my view on this was that details on how to collect is a job of the observability. The service assurance will say what they need. How is an element or characteristics of the observability. So they will know based on that requirement how to accomplish it.
Okay. Would that mean that we're in this context only talking about the metadata? That means what needs to be observed, what kind of actions, correlations need to be done? Okay, understood.
Because otherwise we blur too many layers together.
I agree.
View,
yes,
right?
I agree.
And then it becomes way too complicated. So I think it's better to segment the pieces together. So for me, this is more, and then you have the observability. You could, I think Subesh said it a few times, and I agree with him. It's like you could look at the observability as a provider of the service assurance, right? So he will implement the requirements, and then we segregate it cleanly, in my view. Then because otherwise the service assurance becomes a massive thing, which is
Yep. So I wanted to go on this particular slide, but yeah, I think this year we're not able to. So already we crossed the time. So let's before closing, any closing remark or any points you would like to mention? Anyone? Okay.
Do we meet next week, Subesh, or not?
I'm actually okay, but I'm not sure. Yeah, Bernard won't be available. Right, Bernard? You won't be available?
No, I won't be available.
Okay. I'll be available. Maybe we could make a progress on the design part. I'll be available. We can discuss if you are okay.
Yeah, I mean, we have to look to the others. I could join if you want, yeah. But
Sure.
maybe others. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's plan over the Slack channel itself. We'll discuss that if we are joining the next week or not. And and before closing, happy holidays to everyone and have a nice new year to everyone. We'll meet
Same
next.
to you. Happy New
Yeah.
Year.
Thanks
Thank you.
all. Yeah. Thanks, Sebastian.
Happy holiday,
Great
guys.
job.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Uh, uh, oh, very, very, very. Uh, Hmm. Hmm.